WVW Broadcast Network and The New American are pleased to present The New American TV with your host, Rebecca Terrell. This broadcast is committed to helping you understand the truth behind the news. And now, here's your host, Rebecca Terrell.
Welcome to The New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. Today is Wednesday, February 15th, and here are some of the headlines we're following. Unvaccinated New York City teachers were reportedly flagged and their fingerprints sent to the FBI, according to an affidavit filed in federal court last week. The attorney for New Yorkers for Religious Liberty, John Bursch, had this to say.
When the city puts these problem codes on employees who have been terminated because of their unconstitutional policies, not only do they have this flag in their files, but their fingerprints are sent with that flag to the FBI and the New York Criminal Justice Services. So it impacts their ongoing ability to get employment at other places.
As he said, the flagged teachers were labeled with problem codes that impacted their ability to get another job. The allegations were based on a June 2022 affidavit written by Betsy Combier, president of the Due Process Advocacy Group Advocates, detailing how the New York City Department of Education flagged unvaccinated teachers without evidence of misconduct. They then sent their information, including fingerprints, to the national databases at both the Federal Bureau of Investigation and New York State's Division of Criminal Justice Services. Michael Cain, national grassroots organizer for Children's Health Defense and founder of Teachers for Choice, reported the problem codes on February 9th, one day after the hearing in the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. He said that the actions are continuing to violate teachers' constitutional rights to freedom of religion and their ability to even apply for a job. As this is winding its way through the New York courts, vaccine mandates are affecting another aspect of life, online dating. Tired of facing persecution on dating sites due to their unvaccinated status, entrepreneurs Shelby Thompson and Heather Pyle decided to do something about how unwelcoming most apps were to the unjabbed. So in May of 2021, the pair decided to launch their own website called Unjected. After achieving a surprising amount of success in a short time, Unjected was rejected by Apple's App Store, as Shelby Thompson explains here.
I'm not shocked that it was removed from Apple, but it was kind of an interesting turn of events because we were working with a reporter from Bloomberg, and originally the story was actually about how people were leaving big name dating sites for Unjected, and then it kind of shifted when she had seen some of the posts I had made on our Instagram page about censorship. And so after they kind of discovered us and removed us, we did do an appeal, but Apple didn't accept the appeal.
Talk about swipe left, far left, because the businesswomen were against left-wing censorship. The journalist from Bloomberg evidently reported them from wrongthink, and the app was pulled. On its face, a seemingly frivolous story, but in reality, it's the showcase for a battle between authoritarianism and the assertion of free people that they have a right to make choices without coercion. From Unjected, let's inject some more substance into the headlines and draw attention to a new geological study that puts a damper on the prospects of phasing out fossil fuels in favor of renewables. More to the point, a phase out of fossil fuels by mid-century looks to be a nearly impossible task. It's all about the quantities of minerals contained in Mother Earth. There aren't enough. Simon Michaud, in a geological survey, has done a detailed study of what's required to phase out fossil fuels in favor of renewables. He concluded that the quantity of metal required to make just one generation of renewable tech units to replace fossil fuels is much larger than originally thought. Current mining production is not even close to meeting demand. Current reported mineral reserves are too scant. He pegged copper as most concerning and said that exploration for required volumes of it will be difficult. Selwyn Duke, in his piece in the New American Magazine, writes that powering the United States with wind would require an area 3 times California's size. It has further been asserted that electric car production and use actually cause more pollution than the gasoline status quo. It's all part of what anthropologist Joseph Tainter calls the energy complexity spiral.
So you mentioned earlier a book you wrote with Tad Patzik called Drilling Down. And in that book, you describe something called the energy complexity spiral. Can you explain what that is?
Well, yes, as complexity and energy grow, they have to grow together. On the rare occasions when humans have had little bits of surplus energy, I think on those occasions complexity has grown because of having surplus energy, but then becoming more complex requires still more energy, so that they spiral together. Energy and complexity spiral together. As one increases, the other increases. As energy increases, complexity increases, and then as complexity increases, energy has to increase also. So this is what I mean by the energy complexity spiral.
Joseph Tainter is famous for his book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. To discuss the growing complexity and what this means for global supply chains, I'd like to welcome the New American's Daniel Natal. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Rebecca. Yeah, I mean, he basically is an expert, like an archaeologist and an anthropologist, and he studied ancient civilizations. And in 1200 BC, there was the late Bronze Age collapse, and that basically happened because five empires decided to do a global supply chain. And so they decided that one country would produce food. Why should they all produce food? Just one country, it'll be more efficient. And so whenever you create these systems, they become very fragile. So efficiency basically leads to system fragility. And so they outsourced it all to Egypt. And then when a drought came and the crops failed, all five of those empires basically starved. And it led to a collapse that lasted for 800 years. The Greeks forgot how to read and write over a period of 800 years. And they used to write with with Minoan, kind of alphabet, linear A and stuff. And then, later on, during the Athenian age, they, adopted the alphabet that we know now. So it was a catastrophic thing, and it happened because of system complexity. And so we're basically repeating that same mistake where we're, instead of using homegrown, very cheap, like fossil fuels that are renewable, because fossil fuels basically happen when plants die. And then when they decompose in an anaerobic environment, they, basically it replenishes, and whereas a lot of the things that they're doing now, they're basically through legislation disallowing us to use cheap domestic energy. And they're having us use rare earth elements, 95% of which are in China and come from comets and asteroids and aren't naturally replenished. So there's not enough, minerals to do, automobiles for 8 billion people, to do, electric power grids for 8 billion people. And that may get toward a tip of the hat. The people who are behind these moves are famously depopulation people. So this might not be an oversight. This might be, this is the system, but for a vastly reduced, planetary population.
That's right. You mentioned Selwyn Duke's article at thenewamerican.com. I also wanted to mention Jeffrey Mon, who is another contributor to the New American, late last year did a 7-part series on this very topic because it is so important. He also condensed that into an article called Back to Energy's Future that appeared in our December 26th edition of the New American. And he was talking about how he brought to the table Jeff's background is nuclear energy. He's a retired nuclear engineer. He actually is a docent at the National Museum of Nuclear History in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So he's very well read and well versed on this topic. And he talks about the importance of energy density when you're comparing all of these different sources of energy, of electricity production. And, everything, all of these supposedly renewable sources pale in comparison to so-called fossil fuels in energy density, and everything, of course, is completely eclipsed by nuclear. The energy dense resources are the ones that are demonized, and these things that, yes, no one could be so obtuse as to know that there are not enough minerals to fulfill this beautiful green energy future. So do you think that it is a concerted effort to rob us of our energy, affordable, reliable energy sources in order to depopulate?
Yeah, well, Henry Kissinger famously had that memo where he said, if you control food, you control people. If you control energy, you control nations. So by making it scarce, artificially scarce, creating artificial scarcities, they can basically control and meter it in a way that, so they can control populations or collapse populations. Whenever a society collapses in terms of its energy expenditure, you have mass die-off. And Joseph Tainter has talked about that very articulately, like the Roman Empire. You have to think of energy as stored solar power. Like when you look at coal, that is actually sunshine that went into a plant, and then the plant stored it. It died, and then when you're burning that coal, you're releasing stored solar energy. And so all of these fossil fuels are really stored solar energy. And so all of the empires, you could basically measure them by stored solar energy. And so the Roman Empire was no different. When its energy contracted, so did its population, and it led to mass die-off. And this is true of all civilizations. So when they're talking about, oh, well, we need to scale down this energy for Mother Earth, ironically, it's not green. Their minerals are not green and they're not renewable. Whereas ironically, oil and coal are green. They're from plants and they're renewable and they're self-replenishing.
That's right.
Yeah.
We know that from historic records. All right. Well, trudging on in our headlines today, according to NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, media reports of UFOs being shot down over the United States and Canada are a distraction from the Seymour Hersh report about the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. Over the past week, there have been at least 4 instances of U.S. fighter jets destroying unidentified flying objects, in one case over Alaska, an object that had no means of propulsion but was spotted flying at 40,000 feet, and pilots said interfered with the sensors of their aircraft.
North American Aerospace Defense Command detected an object on ground radar and further investigated and identified the object using fighter aircraft. The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. U.S. Northern Command is beginning recovery operations now.
It was anticlimactic after all the U.S. Defense official press briefings and reporters asking about aliens and UFOs to be told that they were probably just balloons tied to some commercial or benign purpose. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said Tuesday that given what we've been able to ascertain thus far, the intelligence community is considering again as a leading explanation that these could just be balloons tied to some commercial or benign purpose. So this is what, Daniel, this is actually what you and I were saying when this story first broke about the Chinese spy balloon. How do we know? Truly, how do we know exactly what this is? And now they're telling us, oh, it wasn't anything. Look away.
I saw that they had Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana. And Senator John Kennedy had allegedly gone to a briefing, and he went to the press and he basically, engaged in clickbait. And he started saying, oh, well, what I've heard about aliens in this, top secret briefing, people should lock their doors, and it was just ridiculous kind of propaganda. Edward Snowden just recently, said that this was meant to distract the public from the larger story of Seymour Hersh reporting about the United States blowing up, which is an act of war, the Nord Stream pipeline that belongs to Russia. And so to distract from that, basically, they're using a tried and true methodology. I narrated an audiobook, by the way, called Closer Encounters, and it was all about kind of the CIA's and how they're really not doing disclosure, and it's just kind of manipulating the public and kind of channeling. It's just clickbait. It's like a laser pen with a cat, and they're oh, look over here, and everybody's looking over at the the shiny flashy alien, and then now they're saying that a lot of these things might be balloons from used car lots. I mean, just ridiculous things. An anticlimactic bathos regarding this. So.
Right, and I think there might be a lot of other things that it's distracting from. And we know that things are always going on Capitol Hill that media ignores, for all of this, as you call, clickbait. But I see that we are actually running out of time here, Daniel. Thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you back tomorrow. And as for my other viewers, I will see you back on the other side of this break.
If Americans want to remain a free and sovereign nation, more people need to understand the principles and values that built this great nation. At the John Birch Society, we have the organization, the plan, and the resources to do just that. Our founder, Robert Welch, said, "Education is our total strategy and truth our only weapon." Go to jbs.org to learn more, including how you can get involved to work locally and impact nationally. Join the John Birch Society today.
Here's the news, Dad.
Is it, son? Is it?
What about this one, Dad?
Nope. It's hard to tell what's real and what's fake these days. There's just too much baloney out there. At the New American, they cut through the baloney and give me the truth.
The truth is hard to find, but the New American has it. Check it out at thenewamerican.com.
All right, parents, listen up. We've all seen the countless examples of how radical leftists have been destroying American schools. It's no longer just about the terrible math and reading levels. Now, radical left teachers birthed from liberal universities are forcing gender indoctrination in kindergarten. They're teaching lessons on white guilt.
Freedom Project Academy has perfected live online learning over the course of a decade. I get a ton of great feedback about this program, a ton.
They're built on Judeo-Christian values, a classical curriculum. What does that mean? It means they're taught, your children are taught the way that the founding generations of the country. My own son Noah did Freedom Project Academy for several years when he was younger.
The more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board, and I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack, and because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.
Welcome back to the New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. My next guest hardly needs an introduction. He is Mr. Zoe Warren, and he is host of the New American Magazine program 2A for Today. Let's take a look real quick at it.
Nothing warms my heart more than when the underdog, the good guy gets the girl, makes the catch, or wins the fight. So when I hear about an armed 80-year-old man fending off multiple suspects during a broad daylight home invasion in Chicago, of all places, it makes me want to shout. Stay tuned for our 2A for Today Modern Militiaman Spotlight. Welcome to 2A for Today. It was a cold, gray, frigid morning in Chicago, but it was about to heat up quick. Our 2A for Today Modern Militiaman was in the safety of his castle when a pair of home invaders came calling. It was about 10:30 in the morning when he heard a knock at the door. He opened the door, and a couple of thugs forced their way in and began bashing the elderly man all over his body. Our 2A for Today Modern Militiaman was bruised and battered, but not beaten. He pulled out his sidearm and placed a well-aimed shot directly into the chest of the male attacker. Bonnie and Clyde made for the hills, and our 2A for Today Modern Militiaman survived a walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and he can rest easy knowing that it was only a shadow. The best we can hope for concerning the people at large is that they be properly armed. If the representatives of the people betray their constituents, then there is no recourse left but in the exertion of that original right of self-defense, which is paramount to all positive forms of government. Alexander Hamilton.
Mr. Zoe Warren, thank you so much for joining us today. It's exciting to be interviewing you, and I just want to say one of the many things I enjoy about your show is it's so positive. It makes you want to stand up and cheer.
Well, thanks for the encouragement. I appreciate that.
You bet. Well, you have an impressive resume. You're a filmmaker, a journalist. You've been you're editor at large for the Standard SC. But let's talk about this show that you have with the New American Magazine and how important it is. Give us some background. How did it come about?
Well, first of all, Rebecca, thank you for having me on the show. I so appreciate the work that you guys do, and I'm also in awe. I awestruck by the opportunity. So, I didn't start this program 2A for Today on my own free will or volition or whatever. It was given to me, and then it was impressed upon me over and over by the Lord I serve, that this is an important topic and I need to explore it. I need to learn it myself. I'm not an expert in constitutional law. I wasn't an expert at all in guns. I'm not a gun guy. I'm a Constitution guy, but I'm not like your PhD. I'm not like Dr. Brown. I call Robert Brown Dr. Brown because that guy has he should be an honorary doctorate.
Yes, absolutely.
Because of the wealth and depth of knowledge that he has. I'm not one of those. I really have a love for our founders, a love for their philosophy, a love for the Constitution. and a love for gun rights. I really do. I'm just not a gun guy, you know? And so as I delved in, it was like a world of understanding, even understanding of things that are in the scriptures opened up for me, because I went the direction of understanding the ministry of government and how the sword plays into that, and what our role is in a nation that's free and self-governing. Once you've been given the power to self-govern, and the nation, you know, essentially encourages that. That was how the founding of the country began. That's what our founders were saying over and over again. It's our original right. We should all bear arms. The entire populace should be armed, and we should be armed sufficiently. And so anyway, it was amazing the kind of understanding that opened up for me in that process. So.
And not only armed, but trained in how to properly use them. And I know that that's one of the arguments against guns these days, but you can always tell when there's something you need to be very vigilant about preserving, when the mainstream media and the leftist narrative is attacking it. And boy, guns have been under attack, well, since our founding, since the first days of the Republic, right? Let's talk about the current situation, though, with our gun rights. What are the most important things people need to be focusing on right now in order to preserve this most fundamental right that is enshrined in its own amendment to the Constitution?
Well, you know, there's a difficulty we face with the media being pretty much wholly controlled by an apparatchik. Not all of the media companies, but the large corporate media that has the most reach, that has the biggest megaphone, they do the most damage to truth by, you know, they do lies by omission, you know, often. And so there are literally hundreds of defensive uses probably every hour in America, you know. I mean, I would imagine that people are just carrying, and people notice they're carrying, and so the person who is stalking them does nothing. And so those stories never get the light of day, even when they're dramatic. And it's, you know, a situation like a 16-year-old kid, like maybe the local news station talks about it, but it'll never make the 24-hour chyron of, you know, MSNBC. It'll never even be in the ticker, you know. And so, so we really need, as a people, to not, like you said, be trained. I mean, that was the reason why they said that it shouldn't be infringed. So you can be using your firearms, you know, so you can learn how to use your, you know, whatever that firearm is, and become expert level at it. They weren't just talking about have it, you know, get trained on how to turn the safety off and on so you don't shoot yourself. They're talking about you need to be an expert, you know. So we need to be sharing the stories of defensive uses. That's probably, for me, the most preeminent thing, is that anytime there are those types of stories, we need to like be talking about it. You know, back in the founding, there was the pub. Everybody would go to the pub, and stories would, the pub or the church, you know, and the stories would go from pub to church, and that's kind of what we have to do now, because we don't really have the media. So we need to be talking about these things. We need to be training together. We need to have a defensive community mindset, and training our young people, training our elderly people. It needs to be a big old party, you know, where we're just talking about that which is good. Vulnerable people being protected by expressing their own rights, or by somebody else coming alongside and protecting them with the Second Amendment, with the gun right. So.
Right. And right before our broadcast, you'd sent me a list of talking points that I know you wanted to get to. So I'm just going to kind of list through those, and you take it away, because you have a wealth of information to give us. The Bruin, the ATF serial numbers, have the mic.
Yeah. You know, Bruin, it's amazing to me. I feel like I got involved in doing this show when there was going to be a massive shift in the culture. You know, I'm like, Joe Kelly was the one who asked me to explore this idea, and he's the, you know, one of the creative directors of the New American. And so I as I'm exploring it, I'm like, all of a sudden the landscape of gun rights completely gets transformed by the Supreme Court and a New York State and Pistol Association and Bruin decision. I'm not going to go into the depth of the decision. However, the effect of the decision has reverberated across the country. Essentially, the Bruin decision, the the justices opined that you can't just make gun laws, even in the states, unless it's in keeping with the original idea and the original kind of restrictions that would have been some kind of historical national tradition of what the national government would have done to curtail someone's right to keep and bear arms. And that would probably likely be things along the lines of like, sedition and stuff like that, where then they would have the authority to do something. But they don't have the authority to, to take anybody's guns away, not even serial numbers. Like the idea that that should be interstate commerce. And of course, the national government has the ability to regulate interstate commerce. However, the law that they have right now would criminalize someone who inherits a gun that has no, if for instance, you, Rebecca Terrell, inherits her father's arsenal, right? And she has a gun, she loves guns. And in her father's arsenal is one that does not have a serial number that was scratched off. Rebecca Terrell, if she doesn't destroy that gun immediately, and if somebody comes along and says, hey, nice gun collection you got there, and it's an ATF agent undercover, ooh, this doesn't have a serial number, you're going to jail. That's nonsense. And so because the ATF was actually even pursuing that kind of stuff, it just bore witness to the fact that it was just a restriction on gun rights. It had maybe there was a tertiary use by regulating interstate commerce, but they were using it specifically to curtail people's right to keep and bear arms. So they're saying states making laws, federal government making laws in keeping with that kind of idea, not valid, illegitimate. And so now you got P. Diddy, that's what we call him over in Illinois, P. Diddy, Pritzker. He's over there trying to regulate the most sweeping regulation on rifles, and probably in America. Gavin Newsom, all of them, the AG, Garland, they're all just up in arms and trying anything they can. The ATF is putting out every rule it can put out to try to push this envelope and make it a big deal. So anyway, we're at a time where every single one of their infringements is getting shut down by federal courts. Even Obama appointees are like, nah, you can't do that.
Exactly.
So it's so amazing, right? We're at an amazing time. We're like almost at 50% plus one with constitutional carry in the states. This is an amazing time, guys. We're coming back to reality. Our representatives are, some of them are doing their job. I hate being rescued by the Supreme Court. That kind of seems really stupid. Our states have power, and they're so afraid to use it. But
Absolutely. And we're told that unarmed citizens on January 6th were a threat to the very democracy, even though we're not a democracy.
Yeah, the fabric of society is at risk because of J6.
Right. It's one lie after another. The lies are even, like you said earlier, the lies are embedded in the narrative, and we cannot use their language. We cannot cede our rights. Because that's what they're asking. Tolerance, tolerance, tolerance. That is the last virtue of a depraved society. That's what Dr. D. James Kennedy said that, actually, and I love that quote. And that's what we're facing here. We cannot exercise tolerance toward the abrogation of our rights. And I love that your show shows us that. You're doing a great job. I just encourage you, and thank you so much for everything that you bring to the table for the New American. And look forward to having you on again. We're out of time right now, but thank you for your time, and we will be right back after these messages.
Hi, I'm Alan Keyes. I'm the host of IMTV's daily talk show about news and events in America. And I want to say a good word for the New American magazine. Not only because Alex Newman has joined us as somebody who is periodically hosting a show, but because New American magazine represents a alternative media that is willing to tell people the truth. With so much fake news spreading about, and the fact that right now this country's in an existential crisis, we remember who we are and where we come from and what our principles are, or we die. Reading New American magazine can keep you up to the minute on the issues that are challenging us as a people and on which that survival hangs. You can check it out and subscribe at www.thenewamerican.com.
As a lumberjack, I've been cutting wood for decades. My job is pretty straightforward. I see the wood, I chop the wood. My axe goes through every time. You remember when everyone bought all the toilet paper? And they wanted me to wear these things? And someone invested a lot of money into this stuff. They say I'm part of a global plan. I don't think so. It's too hot, it's too cold. You know what? The weather changes. We even hear crazy ideas on how kids should learn.
Here's the news, Dad.
Is it, son? Is it?
What about this one, Dad?
Nope. It's hard to tell what's real and what's fake these days. There's just too much baloney out there. At the New American, they cut through the baloney and give me the truth.
Visit thenewamerican.com and subscribe to get 50% off the cover price. And if you want an even better deal, use the promo code 10OFFSUB. Again, that's 10OFFSUB for more than 50% off.
Welcome back to the New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. You know, there are a lot of people who say that our elections are completely secure, but those tend to be the people who have won the elections, while others say that there are a lot of questions that we have to answer about the integrity of our elections nationwide. Joining me now from our studio in Appleton is a panel led by Mr. Gary Benoit, editor-in-chief of the New American Magazine. Gary, I'm going to hand this over to you and let you introduce your other panelists and take it away on election integrity.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Rebecca. And to my left, we have Steve Bonta, who is the executive senior editor for the New American Magazine. And to my right, we have John Larabelle, who is the managing editor. So welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Okay, so let's talk about election integrity, and let's also talk about the presidential elections coming up. Steve, obviously the New American has said a lot over the last couple of years about the lack of election integrity, about the fact that there is tremendous evidence showing that the election could have been stolen. I don't know if we can say that unequivocally, but certainly evidence points in that direction. So what can we do today? First of all, should people continue to vote?
Well, sure, but I think, you know, there are a couple things that need to be borne in mind. First of all, it's easier to steal elections now that the procedure has been altered from what the founders originally established. Mm-hmm. So in the Constitution, the president, there's no mention of popular election of president. For that matter, senators, of course, were originally appointed by state legislatures, and the idea was that that the House of Representatives should be the only directly elected module of the federal government. It should represent the people directly and all of that, and that continues to be the case. Okay, mm-hmm. and so it's not, I think, coincidental that most of the allegations of electoral fraud, not all of them, but most of them have to do with senatorial elections, like the Fetterman-Oz mm-hmm. contest in Pennsylvania recently, and of course the presidential election. So people have become accustomed to this idea that, well, you know, when we vote, we elect the president. Of course, we've developed this system now mm-hmm. where the electors, the people who are constitutionally supposed to elect the president, and who originally, in the early years of the Republic, simply met and cast their ballots. And whom they voted for was determined by a lot of the usual backroom skullduggery and all that kind of thing. But the bottom line was that the people were not really part of that process, because the office of the president under the original Constitution was not very powerful. Right. And even today, you can see the number of total powers spelled out, given to the president in Article 2 are very few. They're like 4 or 5 total powers that are enumerated there, in contrast to the 20-odd powers that are enumerated for Congress. So we have this odd distortion of the system where the people have been gulled into believing that by casting their vote for president, they're electing the electors in most states, I believe, are now bound by law. They can't be faithless anymore. They have to, their votes have to reflect the majority vote of the people in the state for the president. But the Electoral College remains. I mean, obviously a lot of people want to get rid of the Electoral College outright, which would make this process of stealing elections even simpler, because that's one of the problems of a more or less pure democracy, is it's very easy to corrupt the electoral system. And the same is true for senators. Now, in the case of senators, of course, we amended the Constitution so that senators now are also elected by direct plebiscite, right? But that was not the case originally.
Right.
And so, again, so we've seen in 2020 and now in 2022 as elections of fraud, primarily in the senatorial. Of course, there's an exception with the gubernatorial election in Arizona, but also the senatorial races there have been under a cloud. Obviously, the heroic work of Dinesh D'Souza, focused on Arizona, showed more or less how this was accomplished. And it was accomplished by apparently, by mules dropping fraudulent ballots en masse in ballot boxes, something that would never have been possible under a system where the power of the popular vote was limited to the election of representatives.
Right. And of course, in Arizona in particular, you do have an exciting candidate today in the form of Carrie Lake, who officially was defeated, but there is tremendous evidence of vote fraud in Arizona. And she is fighting to bring that to the attention of the American people, to expose the fraud, and that's really, really exciting. John, what are your thoughts regarding election fraud, and not just regarding the presidential race, but let's say the Senate races and also the House? Do you agree with Steve that it's still worth voting?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I think that, that would be just like handing a gift to the left, to the establishment, if we just said, oh, there's no point in voting, we're just going to give up. I mean, they would love that. They would love for all of us, what they would probably call Trump voters, whether we voted for Trump or not, but, of that ideology, that more Americanist, kind of constitutional-minded, conservative, limited government, they would love for us to just stay home and say, well, it's too late. Or another thing they would probably also like for us to do is to resort to violence to try to change it. And then they could say, oh, look, see, they're a bunch of radicals. We need to just totally crack down on these people. That would be also a gift to them. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I mean, as you said, there's a lot of evidence, whether or not you could say there's absolutely proof, but there's certainly a lot of very strong evidence pointing to the fact that there's massive amounts of vote fraud in this country. And there has been for quite some time. And it's become, as Steve said, it's become a lot easier to do, particularly with relying on, the mail-in ballots and all that kind of stuff, and having it more done electronically. It's a lot easier to manipulate the system that way and to cheat and to, have fraud and the censorship of people who are trying to point it out. That's another thing too. You'd think, well, gee, wouldn't having good election integrity be in everyone's interest on both sides of the aisle? Wouldn't they all say, well, sure, let's have our fair elections. We already think they're fair, but why not just introduce more safeguards and get back to a more, more paper ballots and better, chain of custody for the ballots? Who wouldn't want that? Well, if people are saying they really don't want that, and they're using flimsy excuses for why they don't want, it's disenfranchising people, which is not really true. If you really look into it, it's really not true at all. It's very suspect, why they're resisting efforts to introduce more election integrity into the system. And, and there's a lot of evidence, that the Navarro report, for example, put up by Peter Navarro, the 3 volumes of that thing, it's very comprehensive. If you look through that, I mean, if the shoe were, I've always said this, if the shoe were on the other foot and it happened the other way around, where Trump would have won under these circumstances and Biden looks like he really won, but I mean, people on the left and the media would just be, you would never hear the end of it. If there was that much evidence the other way around, I mean, the outcry would be just unbelievable. But it happened the way it did, and they're saying, oh, no, there's no evidence at all. Well, a lot of people who say that probably haven't actually looked at the evidence. There's a lot.
Well, there are a lot of people who have not, but I'm sure there are people, too, who are lying. So it depends on the person, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, of course, the media is complicit in the cover-up because they're not reporting the information. They're not reporting the evidence.
Yeah, and if we to go back to your original question, if we just say, well, we're not going to vote anymore, let's just, who cares?
Right.
It's corrupt. There's nothing we can do. Well, that's just what you see in these third-world banana republics. Do we really want it to get to that point? Certainly we're not there yet, but if we, the trajectory is certainly pointing that way if we just keep letting this go. Right. So we have to absolutely work for more election integrity and not just give up and throw in the towel.
Right.
No, I mean, we need to work within the system to the best that we can, but I think also that this points up why Marxists and communists love democracy. And they view democracy, more or less pure democracy, as an important stepping stone to get to where they want to go. Because
they've said as much,
yeah, sure, it becomes, and the system that we have now is verging dangerously close to that. It's becoming more and more chaotic and more subject to the control of people who want to manipulate the outcome of elections for various nefarious reasons. You can see that. Whereas, you know, at least in electoral terms, in the early republic, in the bad old times when we didn't elect the president by this sort of pseudo-popular vote, when the senators were appointed by state legislatures, you know, it was a lot more stable. We didn't have this constant cycle of accusation, suspicion, obviously general undermining of confidence in government itself.
Yeah. Now, Steve, you've lived outside the United States in various countries, including what might be called the third world. And of course, you're a citizen of the United States. You were born here, but obviously being in some of these other countries, and I believe you've been to Brazil and Argentina. Were you in Mexico?
I've been to Mexico a number of times just to visit. Yeah.
But you must see quite a contrast. Of course, you were in China too, but quite a contrast between elections in some of these other countries in the United States. So John referred to it's becoming like a banana republic. You think we're all the way there yet?
We're most of the way there. That doesn't mean it can't be reversed. But for example, just to mention one thing, I mean, for people who spend a lot of time in what used to be called the third world, when there was a second world, you know, the communist world, you know, one of the first things they always tell you, that, you know, the embassy warnings always go out and saying, you know, there are going to be elections in country X. Make sure not to go anywhere near a political speech or a demonstration or any kind of public political event, because they so often turn violent.
Right.
And this is the case, for example, in India. I spent enough time in India that I was there during, you know, various electoral cycles. And we were always told the same thing. If you see a gathering of people in the street and some guy giving a speech or haranguing a crowd and, you know, banners of some party or another flying, don't go anywhere near it, because you never know what's going to happen. Yeah. So what we now are being conditioned to believe as sort of the fundaments of freedom, not just voting, but also large public rallies and demonstrations and all of these things, as we saw on January 6th, those types of events also, which are characteristic of direct democracy, are very easily exploited for bad ends and destabilize society right down to the bedrock.
Right. And of course, as was pointed out earlier, we're not a democracy. We are, in fact, a constitutional republic. Yeah. And that's certainly part of the hope that we have, the fact that we are a republic, we have a constitution. Our country is based on the premise that rights come from God, which is obviously a correct premise. Other countries don't have this. And so really all we need to do is to start applying the Constitution once again, to get back to those principles of the Founding Fathers, of the founding generation, and we can certainly turn things around.
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel terrible interrupting this conversation because it's wonderful, but we're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much, and we'll be back after these messages.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence proclaims God-given rights, and we intend to protect them. Working with people like you for over 50 years, preserving freedom and building a better tomorrow. Safeguarding the Constitution by limiting government power. We are restoring liberties, educating voters, and leading the freedom movement. Join with us. United, we will defend our rights. We are all Americans. We are the John Birch Society.
Sophia paused before the door. It read, Department of Bidigital Convergence. Just inside was a new world, a better world, the one of everlasting life, of no pain, of no loss, of no problem. She entered the chamber and her surroundings changed. She saw around her an infinite field of waving golden grain surmounted by cloudless blue sky. The AI voice whispered gently in her mind, Welcome to the Singularity. She couldn't see it and couldn't feel it, but her body had almost instantly been covered by a swarm of tiny gray multi-legged bots that melted through her clothes and into her skin. Not perceiving the nightmare, her eyes had already been consumed and the rest of her body was dissolving as the bots digested her flesh. She felt only a warmth suffusing her being. Drowsy, she drifted to sleep, and her last thought was one of panic. Would she ever wake? Could a nightmare vision like this be an outcome of the much-hyped transhumanist technological singularity? Enter the world of the future as illuminated by the experience of the past in Endgame, the new book by Dennis Barrett, the publisher of the New American Magazine, and find out how the disastrous COVID pandemic response fits with the technocratic elite's thirst to create a transhumanist utopia. Get Endgame from shopjbs.org with free shipping with code ENDSHIP, ENDSHIP. Or get Endgame and the Great Reset Collector's issue of the New American Magazine and get free shipping plus an additional 20% off both with code N20, END20.
I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa. Who knows what would come out of that?
It isn't the Constitution that's the problem. It is the people who ignore the Constitution.
What we need are just more people that would read the one we have.
It's up to us to hold our elected officials accountable,
who understand the Constitution and are willing to take a stand when necessary.
Welcome back to the New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. You know, there are so many organizations and individuals out there trying to push their own agenda, good or bad, but it's not always easy to discern what is good and what is bad. In order to achieve that level of discernment, we have to have a very solid foundation and basic principles. Joining me today from our studio in Appleton, Wisconsin, is the New American Executive Senior Editor, Mr. Steve Bonta. Steve, welcome to the program.
Hi, Rebecca. Great to be here.
Wonderful. I know you'll agree that our country has a rather shaky foundation in basic principles because by their fruits you shall know them, so to speak. Our culture is today sunk in perversion, not just immorality, but amorality. Where can we start building back that firm foundation upon which our country was founded?
Well, just a very gentle corrective there, Rebecca. I think sometimes we get a distorted view of the way things really are. There are lots and lots of magnificent, decent people in this country. The problem is that the more obstreperous ones are the ones who want to flaunt their immorality and even amorality, and those are the ones that command the attention of the media. So it creates the illusion that the entire country is, as the expression goes, going to hell in a handbasket. And I personally, I don't think that's necessarily the case, though it is clear that we are adrift to a certain degree. Now, the importance, the kind of the point of this little discussion you and I have now and then is to talk about first principles. And so, one of the most important principles, and it is a founding principle of this country, is that there is a God. Okay, and not only that, I would add to that a couple codicils, that this God has certain attributes that are directly relevant to what we believe as citizens of the United States. So one of these is that he is a loving God, and that he, in some sense, metaphorical or whatever, that his relationship to us is similar to that of a father to his children. Now, why is this important? Because, of course, people all over the world believe in God or gods in the plural or something like that. But the Judeo-Christian God, this being who is deeply concerned for us, who is motivated by love for his children, cares about us, vests us individually with value, and out of that basic notion come all kinds of other principles that we'll talk about in future segments, about the worth of the individual and so forth and so on. But these things that even non-believers take for granted in our society, such as the worth of the individual and individual rights, stem in the first instance from this belief, this thousands of years old belief in a God who is solicitous of us and of our individuality and our success and our well-being. And so the prime motivation of the Founding Fathers was to frame a government that would protect that state of affairs and to the extent possible would allow us free rein to develop our attributes and to live our lives in a way that we felt was most pleasing to God and in a context where God could most easily bless us in return.
Absolutely. But of course, there are a lot of people who claim to not believe in God. Is it possible to prove God's existence without the virtue of faith?
Well, it depends on what you mean by proof. I think the notion of proof, which has great utility for logicians and for solving problems and so forth, really doesn't apply to God. That's my opinion. This is more of a theological question. So I mean, I realize that opinions on this, but I don't think proving the existence of God is necessarily the point. I do think that that faith can engender a type of knowledge or understanding that is, with which there's a broad overlap with science and logical proof and all of those things that have developed in the long train of classical and Western civilization, which I think are good, but that they're not entirely congruent. There are some things that really can only be understood and grasped through faith in some sense. Now, then the question arises, well, what is the place of the agnostic or the non-believer? Are you trying to say that Americans must be Christian or must be, Judeo-Christian or believers in some sense? I'm not saying that, and George Washington didn't say that either. He once said, he made the point, a very interesting point. He said, and he said this in effect, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, while we grant that, certain exceptional minds may be qualified may be able to understand the principles of freedom, be qualified for self-government, all this type of thing. But he said, notwithstanding that, in general, it's true that you need to have religion, and by religion, of course, he meant essentially Judeo-Christian, religion of that form, to temper people's passions, to impose moral discipline in some sense, or to enable them to self-impose moral discipline, and to cultivate virtue, because only under those conditions can a free republic exist at all.
Right, yeah. And of course, what I was referring to was more along the Thomistic lines of classical teaching. The proofs that there certainly is a God, because we know that everything in nature has an effect. Every effect is caused by a cause, right? And if you go back, it's kind of that question, the age-old question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? There has to be an initial cause that affected everything else. There has to be that initial supreme being that did not need a cause to bring it into being, you see. And then also we have the proof in nature. We can look around and see how the seasons are ordered and nature is ordered. We know that doesn't just happen spontaneously. For instance, if you leave a tilled field to its own and don't take care of it, it's going to grow weeds, right? And not productive plants. So the fact that our universe stays in sync and operates correctly is yet another proof of the existence of God. And if we do acknowledge that truth, then we have to also acknowledge He made all of this. It's His game. It's his ball game. We have to adhere to His rules, not our own base instincts, right?
Yes, well, I agree, of course, personally. The problem with proof, I think that the final causation argument is a very strong one. There are other very powerful arguments, evidence, and of course, when I look at the grandeur of the cosmos, both the outer cosmos, which I've studied over the years in some depth, but also the inner cosmos, the incredible and almost limitless complexity of the human organism, including, of course, the great mystery of consciousness. And all of these things, to me, are just a symphony of evidence in the reality of an organizer, of a God, of a creator. The problem is that much as there are people who would like you to believe that there's such a thing as absolute dispassionate logic, ineluctable proofs that flow seamlessly from premise to conclusion that can't be refuted, if you look at logic closely enough, you see that it's always premised. Even the most rational among us tend to have deep-seated biases based on our convictions. And I've noticed over the years that it's impossible to convince someone who is a determined skeptic. Because from the point of view of skepticism, they can always argue, well, you know, the universe is like a giant machine, it self-perpetuates, and what can you say to that? I mean, if someone is determined not to accept that. So, yeah, but for myself, I found over you know, decades of leading what I guess you might characterize as a life of the mind, that the truth feels good. You know, I can't characterize it any other way than that. It tastes good. It feels right. And you know, so I found in my many academic maunderings and wanderings that you know, that there are certain philosophers and theologians and thinkers generally, scientists as well, who I think were kind of in tune, so to speak, and have something to teach, and others perhaps who are just distractions, depending on their mindset. So, but the truth is always beautiful. And for me, I mean, a remarkable feature is that we seem to be created in such a manner that if we're honest with ourselves, we resonate with the truth. And it requires an act of sort of flagitious dishonesty and self-denial to push that aside and say, no, 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 this isn't how things are.
Right, and it's like you're indicating there's nothing offensive in the Judeo-Christian moral code. And of course, when we say Judeo-Christian, what we're referring to is the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, which are one and the same God. It's not two different gods. But also, we have to also ask, do the rights of man supersede the rights of God? It's an interesting question. What's your answer to that?
Well, what do you mean by the rights of God?
Well, God created everything and all of us, so his rights over us to be able to dictate what we do certainly supersede anything that we're always very, very defensive of our own rights. I think we should maybe be a little bit more defensive of God's rights as well.
Well, I mean, it goes back to the old issue: can the creator be greater than the created? This is a question that often arises in principle in arguments about the Constitution as well, American politics, and certainly religiously that is true. It does seem, although I know that some people would object to this theologically, so I don't want to go too far into this, but it does seem that we have a modicum of moral agency by which we can direct our actions and make choices and so forth and so on. But the will of God is the ultimate and cannot be abrogated.
Absolutely. Sure. We are running out of time, Steve. I'd love to continue this conversation because it is fascinating. We will have to do so on a later broadcast. How about that?
That sounds great.
Thank you so much for your time today. And we are out of time for the New American TV, but we have presented you with the truth behind the news and given you the tools to do it at jbs.org, at thenewamerican.com. We encourage you to visit us online, and we will see you back here tomorrow.